My sister falsely accused me of stealing $110,000 at her wedding. Later, I presented video evidence of her infidelity, shocking everyone. The wedding day exceeded everyone's expectations. My sister, Elizabeth, looked stunning in her couture gown, and her now husband, Brian, appeared to be the happiest guy alive. Everything went flawlessly, including the vows, champagne toasts, and dancing. If there was any tension, I couldn't feel it, at least not until the night after the wedding. The family had gathered at my parents' house to unwind and discuss the big day. We were in the middle of recounted amusing incidents from the dance floor when Elizabeth stood up suddenly. Her voice shook as she spoke, something that hit me like a truck. "John stole our honeymoon money, $10,000. It's gone." The room went silent. I could feel everyone's gaze shift to me. My mind couldn't comprehend what she had just stated. "Stole me? That was absurd." Elizabeth went on and on before I had a chance to respond. She described how sad she was, how she'd been crying all day, and how she felt betrayed. Brian sat transfixed, as if he'd been hit by a freight train. My parents, on the other hand, acted quickly to help her. "John, how could you do this?" my mother asked, shaking her head in disappointment. "You ruined everything, stealing from your sister, your own sister." "That's it," my father added. "You are not welcome here anymore." I tried to stand up for myself and emphasize that I had not touched a cent. I explained that I'd been at the front desk all night in full view of everyone and had no idea where the money was stored. Brian, to his credit, appeared dubious, stating, "I don't think John would do something like that." But Elizabeth wouldn't have it. "Stop defending him, Brian," she demanded. "He's lying. I can't believe you take his side over mine. John, you're disgusting. Get out of my sight." I was stunned. Her outrage wasn't simply about the alleged theft, it was also personal. My parents joined her in informing me that I was no longer a member of the family. My father said, "You are no longer our son," which was the final blow. I exchanged glances with Brian, who appeared as perplexed as I was. Then I left. As I drove away, I started putting things together. I understood exactly why she was doing this. It wasn't about the money, it was about our grandma. Grandma had made it clear a few months ago that she intended to leave most of her money to me. She trusted I would utilize it carefully and preserve the family legacy. Elizabeth, the self-proclaimed golden child, was enraged. She had attempted to persuade Grandma that she deserved the money instead, but it hadn't worked. Elizabeth was determined to make me look like a bad person. As Grandma's health deteriorated, it became her method of sabotaging me. I was angry, but I knew it wasn't over. If she was going to play dirty, I could play even dirtier. I had a secret of my own, one I'd guarded to protect Brian. Elizabeth had been cheating on him for several months. I hadn't intended to expose her, but after what she had done, all bets were off. I began plotting my retribution. Following that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Elizabeth had done. The betrayal hurt, but what hurt even more was that my parents trusted her without question. I couldn't even look at my phone, as the family group chat was filled with messages about how I had let everyone down and how humiliated they were by me. It was as if Elizabeth had flipped a switch and I became the family villain. But I wasn't about to let her win. Elizabeth believed she could destroy me and walk away untouched. What she didn't realize was that I had been hiding a bombshell for months. Back in August, I unexpectedly caught her with someone other than Brian. I had gone to a coffee shop in the next town to see a friend, and there she was sitting at a corner table holding hands with someone I didn't know. They weren't very subtle, kissing, laughing, and acting like a real couple. I didn't say anything at the time since, frankly, it was none of my business. I expected it to come back and bite her eventually. I just never anticipated I'd be the one who had to bite back. Now I wanted proof, something substantial, something undeniable. I knew her routine well enough. She always claimed she was visiting a friend, or running errands when she went missing for a few hours each week. It was obvious what she was up to. My best guess was Thursday around 7:00 p.m. That appeared to be her normal window, so I parked down the street from her house and waited. Sure enough, just around 6:45, I followed her from a safe distance so she wouldn't notice. She returned to the same coffee shop. The guy was waiting for her in the parking lot. I parked it discreetly across the street and began recording. They hugged and kissed, and not just a short peck. This was the kind of kiss that made it apparent Brian wasn't even a thought in her mind. They entered and sat near the window, looking like a couple on a lovely date. The man continued leaning in close, stroking her arm and talking into her ear. Elizabeth ate it up. I captured the entire event, 7 minutes of great film that would turn the issue on its head. When they finally left, I made sure to photograph them hugging again before they got into separate cars and drove off. I waited until she had left before driving home. My heart was hammering all the way home, but it wasn't from nerves, it was from anticipation. I knew I had something that I needed to wait for the right moment. Elizabeth had gone nuclear on me during a family function, so it was only right that I returned the favor. I decided to schedule a dinner a few days later and pretend to apologize and make amends. My parents, still upset with me, reluctantly agreed. Elizabeth accepted without hesitation, possibly believing it was her chance to embarrass me even further. She had no idea what was about to happen. The days leading up to the dinner were agonizing. I remained perfectly silent, even as Elizabeth continued to scold in the family group chat about how some individuals refused to accept responsibility for their actions. Naturally, my parents ate it up. Every time I read a text from them saying something like, "We are so proud of you, Elizabeth," but I remained calm. I knew it would be worth it. The morning of the dinner, I texted everyone in the family group chat, including Brian. I mentioned that I wanted to meet for dinner and clear the air. "I owe everyone an explanation," I wrote. "I need to apologize especially to you, Brian." My mother responded immediately saying they'd be there, but I'd better have a solid excuse for what I'd done. Elizabeth responded with a snide remark about how she hoped I was ready to confess. Brian's response was brief and neutral, a thumbs up emoji. Perfect. Everything was falling into place. I spent the day getting ready. I loaded the video onto my laptop and checked the quality to ensure it was satisfactory. I also printed screenshots in case someone accused me of fabricating the video. When I arrived at my parents' place for supper, I felt as if I were entering a battle and I was prepared to win. When I stepped in, the atmosphere was strained. My parents scarcely greeted me, and Elizabeth sat at the head of the table, smug as usual. Brian stood next to her, quiet and reserved, as he had been since the accusation. I wasn't sure if he believed I had taken the money, but he was certainly keeping his thoughts to himself. We all sat down, and I started by taking a deep breath. "First of all, I want to say that I'm sorry for how things turned out. I know you're all angry with me, and I understand why, but I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize there's something I should have said sooner, something I've been holding back." Elizabeth leaned forward slightly, her eyes full of expectation. She undoubtedly felt I was about to confess. My mother and father just looked, waiting. Brian appeared uncomfortable. I took out my laptop. "What you're about to see is not easy to watch," I told them, "but I think it's important for everyone here to know the truth." Elizabeth's arrogant face cracked for the first time as I hit play. The room went hushed as the video began. It showed her walking up to the guy in the coffee shop parking lot, hugging and kissing him, the date in the coffee shop, the way they couldn't take their hands off each other, and the final shot of them hugging again in the parking lot before driving off. After the video concluded, there was silence for a few seconds. Then Brian said, "Who the hell is that?" His tone was harsh. Elizabeth's face reddened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words emerged. "Answer him," I said. "You accused me of stealing, of tearing this family apart, when all along you were the one who was lying. This isn't your friend, is it? How long has this been going on?" Elizabeth stammered, but Brian did not wait for her response. He pulled back his chair and stood up, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. "You've been cheating on me?" he asked. "The whole time I was working my ass off to give you the life. You wanted the house, the car, all of it for this." My parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. My mother looked at Elizabeth, her voice cracking. "Elizabeth, is this true?" Elizabeth finally got to speak. "It's not what it looks like," she remarked, but no one believed her. "This will be a lesson for you, Elizabeth," I remarked as I stood up. "You started this war, all I did was finish it." Brian grabbed his keys and left without saying anything more. My parents, still shocked, turned against me. "How could you do this to her?" my father asked. I responded she accused me of stealing $10,000 to make me look bad, and I'm the bad guy for showing the truth. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my belongings and fled. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. They sought a villain, and they now had one. But this time it was not me. After dinner, I didn't hear from anyone in my family for many days, no texts, no phone calls, no attempts to explain or apologize. It was radio silence. I assumed they were trying to clean up the mess Elizabeth had made. Brian was the first to contact me. He reached out 2 days after the dinner, and I was shocked he wanted to talk. I assumed he was upset with me for unexpectedly catching him off guard, but he didn't seem angry. "I just wanted to say thank you," he remarked. "For being honest, I wish it hadn't come to this, but I'm glad I know." We talked for a bit, and he told me he had already begun making plans to move out of the house he shared with Elizabeth. He further stated that he had canceled their trip to the Maldives and stopped making payments on the car he had promised to purchase for her. "She can figure out her own life now," he joked. I asked him if Elizabeth had tried to contact him since dinner. "She's been blowing up my phone begging me to understand," he told me. "But there's nothing to understand. She cheated, end of story." Hearing him say that gave me an odd feeling of closure. At least someone in this mess could see clearly. A few days later, my mother finally contacted me. She sent me a long, guilty text message about how upset she was with me for ruining Elizabeth's relationship and how family should always be there for each other no matter what. I stared at the message for a moment, trying to decide whether it was worth responding to. Finally, I sent a simple response. "Family supports each other by telling the truth, not by covering up lies. Maybe you should think about that." That did not go over well. My father responded with a note telling me I was being immature and that Elizabeth was still their little girl, regardless of what she had done. That was ridiculous. They were willing to forgive her cheating and manipulative behavior because she was their favorite. Meanwhile, Elizabeth remained silent. No words from her. I wasn't sure if she was too embarrassed to talk or if she was plotting her next move, but I didn't care. She had lost her FIANC, her free trip to the Maldives, and probably the majority of the sympathy she had received from my parents. However, I couldn't ignore the notion that this wasn't over. Elizabeth was not the sort to accept defeat. If she was quiet, it was because she was planning, and I wasn't wrong. A week later, she moved. I awoke one morning to a flurry of texts from mutual friends and extended family. Elizabeth had apparently started spreading a new tale, claiming that I had set her up to ruin her wedding and harm her relationship. She said I had been following her for weeks hoping to catch her slipping, and that the film was a desperate attempt to retaliate against her for exposing the alleged crime. It was ludicrous, but the damage had been done. Some people bought her story, particularly those who didn't know the full details. They began contacting me, calling me nasty and hateful. Others, thankfully, saw through her lies and informed me they believed me. But I wasn't about to sit back and let them dominate the story. I had all the proof, including the video, screenshots, and texts. If she wanted a public fight, I was prepared. But before I could make a move, something unexpected happened. Brian stepped in. He sent a lengthy letter on social media explaining everything: the adultery, the charges, the dinner, and even my role in revealing the truth. John didn't ruin our relationship. Elizabeth did that all by herself. The post went viral among our close friends and relatives, shutting down the majority of Elizabeth's supporters overnight. People started contacting me, apologizing for jumping to conclusions. Even my parents stayed silent for a while, perhaps understanding how horrible they looked for taking her side so easily. What about Elizabeth? She doubled down. Her next move would push things to an entirely new level. Elizabeth's next move was both bold and dumb. She attempted to sue me for slander. Yes, you read it correctly. She actually hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit alleging that I purposefully harmed her reputation and caused her severe distress. When I was handed the documents, I couldn't determine whether to laugh or be outraged. She wasn't just desperate, she was insane. I didn't waste any time. I hired my own lawyer, showed them the video, the texts, and Brian's social media posts, and they assured me I had nothing to worry about. This is a fear tactic, they said, but if she wants to go to court, we'll go to court. So we did. The court date was about a month later. The majority of the family showed up, likely out of morbid curiosity. Brian was also there, sitting quietly in the back. Elizabeth appeared with her lawyer, all smug and cocky, as if she had already won. The judge was not impressed. Her lawyer claimed that I maliciously taped and circulated private footage of Elizabeth, causing her to lose her relationship and social position. But my lawyer instantly shut it down. They emphasized that the footage was recorded in a public place and depicted behavior that directly contradicted Elizabeth's earlier charges against me. They also pointed out that I had only shown the film to our immediate family before Elizabeth's lies made the situation public. Then came the finest part. Brian took the stand. He stated that Elizabeth accused me of stealing without evidence and attempted to isolate me from the family. He said that the video was the only way he discovered the truth about her infidelity. John didn't ruin anything, he explained, his voice steady and calm. He saved me from wasting my life on someone who didn't respect me or our relationship. Elizabeth's lawyer attempted to cross-examine him, but Brian did not flinch. He kept to the facts, recounted how he had spent months being manipulated by Elizabeth's lies. There was no hesitation in his testimony, leaving little opportunity for Elizabeth's lawyer to twist the narrative. Every word Brian spoke made it clearer to the court that Elizabeth's claims had been nothing more than a desperate attempt to cover up her wrongdoings. When it was Elizabeth's turn to testify, the cracks in her story started to show. Her answers were inconsistent, and she contradicted herself multiple times. At one point, she claimed that the man in the video was just a friend, but moments later, she stated that she and Brian were on a break at the time. It was painfully obvious to the judge that Elizabeth was lying. The more she spoke, the more her credibility crumbled. The turning point came when the judge looked at her and said, "It is clear that this lawsuit was an attempt to deflect blame for your own actions." The courtroom went silent as the weight of those words hit her. Elizabeth's face flushed with humiliation, and it was obvious to everyone present that her plan had backfired. By the end of the hearing, the case was dismissed. The judge ruled that I had not defamed Elizabeth, and that the evidence I presented was both truthful and significant. The case was over, but the consequences of her actions were far from finished. The real kicker came when the judge turned to Elizabeth, speaking directly to her in a tone that was both firm and unforgiving. "You have wasted this court's time with baseless accusations," she said. "I urge you to reflect on the decisions that led you here today." Elizabeth exited the courtroom in tears. Her face was a mask of frustration and disbelief, but it was clear that she had lost everything. My parents' extended family, and even her closest friends saw her for what she really was, a liar, a manipulator, and someone who had ruined her own life with her deceitful actions. After the court ruling, Brian had no further contact with her. He completed the process of moving out and officially ended their relationship. His final words to me were simple, but filled with meaning. "Thank you, John." As for my parents, they were humiliated. Slowly, they began to acknowledge their mistake in siding with Elizabeth. My father reached out to me a few weeks later. His message was not a grand apology, but it was enough for me to know he was reflecting on everything that had happened. "We made a mistake," he said. "I hope you can forgive us one day." I considered his words carefully. I wasn't sure if forgiveness would come easily. After everything they had put me through, it wasn't something I could offer right away. But in time, maybe. Elizabeth, meanwhile, disappeared from the family scene entirely. She moved out of state, claiming she needed a fresh start. From what I heard, she struggled to make friends, hold down a job, or find any stability in her life. Her reputation, one built on lies and manipulation, followed her wherever she went. I wouldn't say that the whole ordeal didn't leave scars, because it did. The pain of being falsely accused by my own sister, of losing my parents' trust, and of having to go to such lengths to protect myself, was not something that would vanish overnight. But in the end the truth triumphed, and I was free from the cloud that Elizabeth had tried to cast over me. Would I have chosen a different path? Maybe. But in the end Elizabeth started the war, and I finished it. I don't regret exposing her. I didn't just stand up for myself, I stood up for the truth. And that was something I could never regret. As for my family, it's unclear what the future holds. The damage done to our relationships might never fully heal, and the scars may linger for years. But I have peace knowing that I did the right thing, and the truth came out in the end.